Greetings, Planeswalkers. This is Chris, aka NAS. I hope all is well with you and you're taking care of yourselves and the ones you love. Today is another installment of Friday Night Magic. Tommy Bear and your best brother, Old Bearby, here we go. As this is the first of these that I'm actually recording since planeswalking off to this new channel, I want to explain a little bit. I have over 60 commander decks. I like them. And after a handful of conversations about magic and a lot of other things, I decided to do this old segment for Old Bearby and Tommy Bear, as mentioned already. So I take a deck after they randomly select a number, and then I break it down and talk about it. Some will be longer than others, based on sometimes the history of the decks, or my past play with it, maybe mechanics, or it's just a more complex deck. And below, I will be linking specifically to each deck I cover on the tapped out page that I have. So that will be down below. This is deck number 57. So far, we've covered deck number 59, which was Morophon, deck number 3, which was Mizzix, and deck number 62, which was Firesong and Sunspeaker. Tommy and Bearby, if you could, my friends, please each of you give me another number, and in my next installment, I may try to do 2. Before I hop into this, I do have my kiddos, in fact, coming to spend the night tonight and then for the next 2 weeks, and so things may be a little less routine. This is the dance I dance with my life and my schedule. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's move on to Edgar Markov, Lord of the Night. This is a vampire tribal deck, and its commander definitely highlights this kind of deck, a tribal deck. Fast Eddie, as I call him, Edgar Markov, is a 4/4 vampire knight, which I just realized means he could go in another deck, but I will talk about that more later. He has first strike and haste, and when he attacks, each other vampire that I control gets a 1/1 counter put on it. So the more he swings, the more strength and power his army and his horde has. Speaking of that vampire horde, EMMINENCE is a thing. And what that does for him is help him to get his army assembled while he is still getting all armored up, probably taking a snack and getting prepared for battle. No need for him to be out in unnecessary skirmishes and the such. And that's no place for a true Lord of the Night. So as long as he is in play or in the command zone, any vampire spell that you cast has him create a 1/1 black vampire token. I love this because it displays to me the preparation, and the card wonderfully, the art on it, I should say specifically, captures that as he's getting prepared. While, like I said, the masses are out there doing their jobs, and he's preparing to do his. So this deck is obviously themed around vampires, and a combination of aggressive creature-based tactics and a little bit of subtle board control. One does not live to this age and attain this much power simply by being graced with undeath. No. It takes cunning and it takes planning. So moving on to the other 99, we have our land. Nothing special here. However, I do have Castle Lochthwain and Castle Embereth, but now need Castle Ardenvale, which is the white colored card. Beyond that, the land base is nothing noteworthy, but again, a full list is in the tapped out link below. Now that we're wrapped up with lands, as we generally do, we'll move into mana rocks. Nothing crazy here. And then enchantments are not crazy in this deck. And while I didn't do this on purpose, I do want to point out right now that all 3 of the enchantments that I have are white. This will be relevant later. Then in artifact support, I have some vampire tribal support in Herald's Horn and Maskwork Nexus, and even Heirloom Blade with its tribal attachment ability. And then Library of Lang and Fountain of Youth are about the power, the knowledge, the ancient nature of Edgar Markov and the vampires. My instant and sorcery slots are mainly about utility, not so much on theme. except for a pair of sorceries in the name of Crippling Fear and New Blood. And then we have Rise of the Dread Marn. Remember that for later also. With Edgar spawning a lot of tokens, and as you will see shortly, no shortage of cheap vampire spells to cast. With this guy on the board, a board wipe from an opponent, or even maybe from me, is a way to get a fat grip of cards. As they say, one must slaughter a lamb before the feast. Now onto the vampires of this horde. We start little and move up in power / recognition. But first, some of the big names. Here we have Baron Sengir, one of my favorites and one of the old Magic names. I had this card in my box. I don't remember if I have him anymore, but I know I do have an old Sengir vampire, which I need to find. I like the way Baron Sengir used to have a 2/2 counter put on him, but that has been replaced with 2 1/1 counters. And then here we have his beautiful loving wife. Please note her ability and that she's a dwarf. Remember I talked about white enchantments. This deck punishes holiness and piety, so we're going to have to either get those out without her or pay the price. One thing I do really love about this card, and it's not something you see much, at least in my opinion, is the hate and it being very direct and open. I may do a video on that someday with representations of those older cards that are like that. I enjoy that. Now, to the masses of vampires, we have our Viscera Seer. Note, with Baron on the board, sacking tokens makes him bigger. If the opponent has no flyers to block, this is a good way to sneak in a big, flying, damaging vampire. Fly in for the hit, and if he's not blocked, or if he is just unblockable because maybe they don't have flyers, sack all those tokens that you can, perhaps to Viscera Seer, and give him those counters before he bites home. Note that all of the one-drop vampires, like this Indulgent Aristocrat, are also garnering his lordship a 1/1 black vampire token. It's like the Innistrad Dark and Deadly vampire-oriented version of Christmas or a buy one get one free sale or something. Null Priest of Oblivion is my idea of a perfect card in terms of modes. It can be just a 2/1 vampire with lifelink and menace, and net me a 1/1 vampire token. Or if I want, I can bring back a heavy hitter later in the game directly to the battlefield. Cordial Vampire, also so warm and inviting. Don't mind the mess back there. So for context, if we were to have any of the cards so far in my opening hand, I in essence have a Viscera Seer, Cordial Vampire, and 2 1/1 vampire tokens on the board on turn 2. Straight out of Kaladesh Sun, here we have Gifted Aetherborn and a Vampire Hexmage. A nice card, but it is truly devastating to counter-centric decks. And it can even kill a few commanders outright just by playing it, because there are a few 0/0 commanders that are only kept alive by the counters that they come into play with. Then we have Asylum Visitor and Gatekeeper of Malakir. Each have a side advantage and, again, are still each only 2 mana. We have our first 3-colored and multicolored vampire in the Stromkirk Captain. And we have a Vampire Aristocrat and a Captivating Vampire. And our Vampire Nighthawk. The next card deserves a bit of a mention for a few reasons. First, it's a vampire. Next, it is going to get bigger, and it's different from our Lord in that this creature triggers any time any vampire hits the battlefield, not just if a spell were cast. So this means if this gentleman is out here doing vampire things on the battlefield, and I cast the aforementioned Viscera Seer for 1 black mana, I will get a Viscera Seer who will come onto the battlefield. I will get a 1/1 black vampire token, and when these 2 hit the battlefield, our new blood gets 2 counters for each of them hitting, all for, in that case, 1 mana. Now our first mono red vampire in the form of Stromkirk Occultist. Our first Eldrazi infused vampire thus far. And this bad boy from Rise of Zendikar, another Eldrazi and vampire plane, although not as infused as Innistrad. Now, I'm not a vampire fan. I've always been on the werewolf side of the equation or house, but I love this card. I love the art, what it does, and down to the flavor text. Immerstorm Predator, because why not have a vampire dragon in all of this mix? With some great abilities. The Bloodlord of Vasgoth and Champion of Dusk, Bloodline Necromancer, a shiny Scion of the Swarm, Epicure of Blood, and our last nameless vampire in the form of the Butcher of Malakir, a great but high-costing mana vampire. The wonderful thing about this is, with this on the board, it bypasses Indestructible, Hexproof, Shroud, things like that, and other forms of evasion. And again, I talked about the subtle ways to control the board, and that's what this is an example of. And now we move on to the legendary vampires, the ones that some of you may know by name, starting with the only white creature in the deck, Mavrin Thane, Dusk Apostle. And then on to Olivia, mobilized for war. We have seen the Butcher of Malakir. Now we have Drana, Liberator of Malakir. Then Olivia Voldaren, she had a card above, who should be an aristocrat in my opinion. And then we have another Drana, this time Kalastria Bloodchief, before moving on to another vampire of Zendikar, but a newer one, Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats. We're going to go back to Aeson, the set of homelands, folks. Khazararv, Sengir Pureblood tells me that. The lore of that time, Baron Sengir, is coming full circle, and I cannot wait. I loved the Homelands set, but again, I was kind of playing and buying during that set. Note that the old vampire mechanics of counters upon death before feasting your eyes upon Vish-Khal, Blood Arbiter. And then the last and most flamboyant of the group, I'd wager, Lycia, Sanguine Tribune. So that was the deck in all of its blood-sucking, Thane-sharpening, immortal glory. Last piece I want to point out is the interaction of the Species Specialist and Rise of the Dreadmarn. First, both Olivia's and Maskwood Nexus have the ability to make that human into a vampire, but that's not really relevant. It's just on flavor. Beyond that, though, Rise of the Dreadmarn is a board wipe benefit also. So, if I have cast 3 vampire spells and also cast Species Specialist, I have a total of 6 vampires because I would have the 3 plus the 2 plus the 3 tokens that would spit out. So if an opponent sees that and thinks it's getting too out of control perhaps early in the game, they may try to board wipe it. And it's not a bad idea, but that will net me 6 cards. I will lose my board advantage, but have a full grip of cards and potentially cheap vampires to come out with their tokens. Well, if I cast Rise of the Dreadmarn before the end of that turn, I will get 6 zombie berserkers, which for me is not crazy, and it would actually only net me 3 because I believe they are non-tokens, but after a board wipe, having 3 of them on the board is a wonderful state. And in addition, if I have something like Maskwood Nexus out on the board, it will make them into vampires. Or I could have Olivia start biting them into vampiredom. And that is about it. I hope that you all enjoyed it, and sleep well tonight, Planeswalkers. I hope all is well with you, you're taking care of yourselves and the ones you love, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh, one last piece. Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale, Edgar and Knights. Should I break this deck up and make a Lord of the Knights deck, but Lord of the Knights with a K, not Lord of the Knights with an N? So I know a lot of you are probably saying no. Now stop and think again. First, I can keep the guts of this vampire deck get another Markov, or use his large-faced card that comes with the commander deck as the commander for his deck. Then pull all of the knights out of the Edgar vampire deck while replacing them with other equally amazing vampires that I had to pull, and take those specific knights and put them into that knight deck. Edgar Markov is also a knight, so what I could do is make the deck about getting him out with lots of tutors and things like that, which are available in white and black in this regard. And while that would nullify his Eminence ability, this deck would be slightly different in that that's not important, because this would be a more knight vampire centric deck, not just focusing on knights. And because the part of the deck that is new is that Sir Gwyn wants equipped knights to attack, I don't need a mass amount of vampires. I need a select few of vampire knights that I can equip and attack with. I'd love to know your thoughts. Should we stick with the Lord of the Night deck, or should we move on to the Lord of the Night deck? I'm glad you agree with me either way. Take care, adventurer.